Youthicorn. This is a show where we answer questions that have been submitted by our youth viewers about just about anything.
I'm Lucy. I'm a registered social worker, and I have a master's degree in social work, and I'm a counselor here at Clearbrook.
And I'm Corey. I'm a certified Canadian counselor. I have a master's degree in psychology, and I'm also a counselor here at Clearbrook Wellness Centre.
So today, for our very first episode, we're going to be combining two viewer questions. The first one is, how real was 13 Reasons Why? And the second question we're going to try and tackle is how to talk to a friend about suicide.
So these are difficult topics that may bring up some difficult feelings for people. We want you to know that if you are struggling with suicide, with thoughts about suicide, that help is available to you. If you are currently having thoughts about suicide, please flip through to the end of this episode and take a look at the resources that we have there. If you don't find resources for your area there, then please contact a suicide prevention line, or go online and just Google suicide prevention or suicide help and find some help in your area. We want it really clear for you that help is available.
Corey and I come from different personal perspectives on this and professional perspectives.
One of us might have strong feelings.
So Corey is a mother of 2 teenage boys, and I am not a parent of human children.
Lucy has cats.
I have 2. So our perspectives on this will be different, and I think there will be moments where we get a little bit heated. So please keep in mind that we are human and that we are going to be telling you guys our thoughts and feelings associated with this, with some of our professional opinions, but what we say isn't it is or it isn't. We're simply providing some thoughts. We're simply providing maybe a different perspective on this.
Informed opinions. They're informed opinions. And one of the reasons that we want to talk about 13 Reasons Why right now is because the second season is coming out right away. And so we feel like there's a way that we can help you to prepare for that season so that you can approach it critically. And I know that as youth, you probably get tired of hearing more critical thinking because, when all your papers you write for high school stuff are critical thinkers. But there is actually, and entertainment's just supposed to be entertainment, but there is a way to approach this entertainment with critical thinking skills so that you don't end up being triggered by it, or so that you take it for what it is and understand it in that context.
Okay, what did they get right? I think they got right with 13 episodes explaining 13 reasons why, because we know, and most of you know, that typically when we are feeling really depressed or having thoughts of suicide or feeling suicidal, that it's not just for one reason. It's not just because one friendship ended or one relationship went sour or we saw something we shouldn't have seen one time. It's a bunch of things, right? It's an accumulation.
Here's my problem though.
Okay.
So yeah, they got 13 reasons. There was 14. And the 14th was the biggest underlying factor, and they didn't address it. And that 14th reason was that Hannah Baker clearly had underlying mental health issues that were not addressed. She definitely met the diagnostic criteria for some things that were treatable. She also had really poor coping strategies. Her resilience was not as high, and those are all things. This is what's so frustrating to me. Those are all things that can be addressed with a competent adult, with a competent counselor, with a competent teacher, with a competent somebody. Those can all be treated and addressed. But that was not at all presented as a factor in her final decision.
Right.
And that to me is a big problem, because when you're watching the show as a youth, you see, I've had a friend treat me like that. I had a friend slap me and walk away. I lost a friend because we got in a fight or there was a misunderstanding or something. And then all of a sudden she becomes really relatable. And then all of a sudden the choice that she made seems like an option, whereas before it might not have.
Right.
All right, now go.
Okay, now I'm allowed to speak. I think what they got right as well is what you're kind of showing some emotion about, some activation about, saying that there was no competent adults. And while I kind of agree with that, I think what it showed really well was that youth often feel like they don't have adults that they can talk to. They don't feel like their teachers get it. They don't feel like their parents get it. They don't feel like maybe an older sibling gets it. So they do feel isolated. And I think that's something that when parents are watching the show, that they need to really keep in mind that, maybe this isn't just the show, even though it's dramatized to quite an extent. Maybe, I wonder if my kids do feel like they can talk to me. I wonder if the school counselor at my kids' high school has a rapport or some type of relationship where you feel that they can go talk to that school counselor. And so I think what they got right about that piece, well, I know you have a different perspective, is that they show that, you know what, yeah, there is a disconnect between youth and adults or parents or teachers.
There can be.
There can be.
And for a lot of youth, there will be. For a lot of youth, talking to their parents won't be an option. And we even saw that in the show, right?
Yeah.
But Hannah Baker had caring, incompetent parents.
She did.
She didn't go to them.
She did.
But she did have them as an option. Now can I talk about the things they got wrong?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Look at the smile on her face.
Well, because this has just been building. It's been building. Okay, so one of the things that I feel like this show got wrong, so there's media guidelines that say this is how you address suicide, and they're there for a really good reason. There was a study done back in the mid-'80s. I was alive during that time.
I was being born. I was there.
Yeah. The study was done in Vienna, and what was happening was there was a rash over several years of suicides where people were jumping in front of subway trains. And so the media would respond in a certain way. The media would show up, they would film the body covered up on the tracks, they would do a profile of the person. And what they were finding was that this was perpetuating this means of suicide. And so an organization got together and set out some media guidelines saying, try this. And the guidelines were that you don't discuss the method of death, you don't show photos, and you don't reveal the person's name, you don't sensationalize it, and you don't use nothing graphic at all in there. And what they found was that within 6 months, I think it was 6 months, my numbers might be off, please don't write us and judge me on it, but within 6 months, the suicides by subway had reduced, when they stopped reporting it the way they had, by 70%.
That's a lot.
Like, that's an astronomical number.
Yeah.
And so one of my issues with the show is that they hit all of the don'ts. The very first scene in the show is a memorial to Hannah on the locker.
Absolutely.
And so, like, it kind of brings to mind this whole Logan Paul thing this week, right? I mean, it was all sensationalizing. It was graphic, and it was all about his reaction. Okay, I just can't. Okay. So my problem is that the show did not respect the media guidelines for addressing suicide. Fundamentally, my issue with the show is suicide as entertainment. Because they're putting it under the umbrella of entertainment, it allows them to propose that suicide is an answer. Because for their main character, suicide was the answer. And I feel like that just kind of hung there, and there's a feeling that it's just entertainment, so it's okay. It's not okay.
Okay, 2 more things I think that they got wrong, and then maybe if you're feeling calmer, we can maybe move on from this.
Am I too activated?
First thing I think that they got wrong too is that they had a Beyond the Reasons Why at the end of the series, and they talked for about 30 minutes, and the executive producers and the director and some other folks,
some psychologists,
that's right, and psychiatrists actually were speaking about kind of the intent of the show and the reasons why they chose to do the show, and how they wanted certain elements of it to be really accurate or real. I think they should have taken a huge chunk of that really important conversation and put it at the front of the show before the first episode, as a bit of a disclaimer as well, to say these are some of the topics that we'll be discussing in an entertainment modality, but to keep in mind that this may or may not trigger you. What I would have liked to see is from the executive producers and the folks that created this show was to have some type of conversation as a guide. Here are some things to keep in mind when you're watching the show. Here's maybe some moments that you may want to pause the show. Here are some things to think about while you're watching. Here's a bit of a guide, maybe an informal guide as to how to watch the show. I personally binge watched it because that is the nature of Netflix, is to binge watch. Right?
So what you're saying is if they had said, here's how to watch this show, then they could have clarified that yes, it's entertainment, but we need to be very clear about when the real life part ends and the drama part begins. We need you to understand how to separate those.
And I think the other thing that they got wrong, to finish my point, and this is going to also incorporate into what we're going to talk about now, which is a little bit about kind of what to keep in mind when you're watching the show, is that Hannah's voice, the main character's voice, was throughout every single episode. She was the main character in every single episode.
Hey, it's Hannah. Hannah Baker. Don't adjust your whatever device you're hearing this on. It's me. Live and in stereo.
When in fact, in reality, she was already dead. She had already died. And so I think it gives the misconception that she's still very much part of the show and that she is kind of watching over to see how these reasons that she picked, how these youth, how they're feeling what she felt, the guilt that they're feeling, the depression that they're going through, the increased substance misuse. It's almost like she's watching her either intended or unintended plan kind of be in effect, when in fact she would actually have no idea. She would have no idea.
And so if suicide is a means of achieving revenge, right, which I feel like this was a revenge fantasy. And so if suicide is a means of achieving revenge, you're going to only actually get that feeling of fulfillment from it if you can see the other people suffer. And she was clear that she wanted them to be suffering.
That she wanted them to feel what she had felt.
Right. But she doesn't get to see if that was actually effective or not.
And that's something I actually had to remind myself, even though I was binge watching. After every episode, I had to remind myself she wasn't actually there to see any of that. She wasn't there to actually observe it or to feel some sort of gratification.
Because she was literally put in there. There were scenes with her and Clay together.
Right.
And he's got the cut on his head, so you know that it's present day.
Right.
But she's there literally right beside him.
Yeah, I felt
It doesn't put across the idea of suicide as
it's final. It's final. Which is what suicide is, right?
Right.
It's a permanent choice to a temporary problem.
And irreversible.
Absolutely.
Yes. So then how do you watch the show critically? How do you keep a critical mind about this and separate the reality from the drama?
Well, personally, I chose to probably do it the wrong way. I chose to binge watch it.
By yourself?
By myself, in my basement, and with like the lights off, and didn't call or talk to anyone about it.
What's the problem with binge watching it? I know what I think the answer is, but because you guys binge watch, I binge watch. What's the problem with binge watching?
I think that's the nature of Netflix, right? Is to binge watch, which is why I think we both have a problem with the show being on Netflix, because it elicits that you're going to do that. What I think the problem is with binge watching is that you're not actually thinking about what's actually the difference between, like you said, the truth of it and the entertainment value of it. And you're not paying attention to, I believe, the secondary story, which was Alex, who at the end of the final episode actually shot himself in the head. But you saw throughout the episodes him he was increasingly depressed. He was really struggling with, shouldn't we just tell people, like, don't we deserve to be held responsible for these things?
He had behavioral warning signs.
Some behavioral warning signs. We even saw Jessica, her increased substance misuse with alcohol.
She's drinking a lot.
Sorry, she's drinking a lot.
You're using big people words.
I'm using fancy words, I'm sorry. We have an intelligent audience.
But that's the problem. The problem for me with binge watching is that it creates an alternate reality. You spend 8 hours in Hannah Baker's world and it just feels real. You really start to relate to her. You look at, well, she had this one thing happen and I've had that happen, and it just seems like reality, and things that wouldn't otherwise seem like an option can suddenly become an option because you were immersed in it.
Right.
So when you turn it off, you still feel that. I don't know. I felt it in my stomach after.
You know, every time I was watching The Parents, I had to pause the show, or I had to take a minute to go get water, have a bathroom break, and just kind of sit with that feeling, and then I was able to resume the show. But that was really hard for me to watch.
And so I think keeping in mind that taking breaks, stopping watching, noticing what's going on in yourself, and when you're feeling triggered, when you're feeling that grossness, stop watching.
Yeah.
Go talk to somebody about it. Don't just power through it, but stop and be aware of what's coming up in you and how you're reacting to it.
And so then I think we'll kind of jump into the next question, which was, how do I talk to my friend about suicide?
And we want to tackle this two ways. We want to tackle this from the perspective of, if I'm thinking about suicide, how do I talk to somebody about that? Because the research suggests that overwhelmingly people that are considering suicide don't actually want to die by suicide. And so there will be some reaching out. Quite often there will be some reaching out. So if I'm somebody and I'm thinking about suicide, how do I reach out? And the other perspective we want to take is, if I have a friend who's thinking about suicide and I suspect they're thinking about suicide, how do I talk to them about it? So if you are thinking about suicide, you need to find the right person to talk to about it. And you might not get it on the first try. And it doesn't mean that other people have bad intentions, but they might not be well equipped to answer your questions. And so it's really important to not give up on finding the right person. But you got to trust your gut. You're going to know if you've got a friend that can take you seriously and can understand this, or if they're just that jokey, always, nothing is ever serious friend. You're going to know if you can talk to your mom and she's going to connect you to the right resources, or if she's going to lose her mind. You're going to have a sense for that and follow it. And if you run through everybody that you know in your life and there is nobody that you feel like you can actually talk to about it, there are professionals. So just keep going until you find it. If you end up texting a suicide prevention line and you can connect with somebody there, you've got somebody who knows what they're talking about. You are not the first person that's had the conversation with them, and they're well prepared to talk to you, but you have to be prepared to keep trying until you find the right person.
And I think the thing to keep in mind, so you had mentioned about that study or the situation in Vienna in the 80s about they were sensationalizing it, and so then more people were doing it. It's actually the opposite when you talk about suicide. The more you talk about suicide and using the language, I think, is really important. Whether you're a parent, a school teacher, a counselor, a friend, or the person feeling that way, it's okay to use that word, because using that language doesn't encourage other people to use that language to feel that way, right?
It's just clear, and that's how you start. If you're concerned about a friend who's thinking about suicide, that's how you start. You ask the question, have you been thinking about suicide? Use the word suicide. Understanding that asking somebody if they've been thinking about suicide is not going to suddenly put the thought in their head. Okay, so you ask me, have you been having thoughts of suicide? I say, yeah, I actually have for a couple weeks now. And then what?
Then we start talking about a safety plan. And that's kind of a professional term, but that's really what it is. Starting to investigate a little bit and explore with the person expressing these thoughts of, okay, and so do you have a plan in place? Do you have a plan to carry this out?
And what is that plan? What are the specifics? Because part of the safety planning is going to be, okay, you've been stockpiling your mom's pills.
Right.
Okay, let's go take those pills.
Yeah.
Right. Safety planning to help create a safe environment. But I think it's important to note here that because you've asked about suicide and because you're trying to help somebody does not mean that you've assumed responsibility for the outcome.
And that's a really important point, I think.
Because that's what will send some people running.
Yeah.
Oh, you've been thinking about suicide? Crap.
I don't have the skills and the ability to be equipped with this kind of bombshell that this friend or this person just landed on me, and now I feel solely responsible whether they live or die. That's not the case. And that's really why I think it's important to explore with a person. Do you have a plan? Do you feel, or don't you have a plan? Some people don't have a plan. Some people feel that they're having active thoughts of suicide, and they're feeling suicidal, but they don't have a plan. And so that diminishes the risk a little bit, but it's also then really important that next step after you're doing some safety planning and not leaving the person alone is to connect them to that next person, because maybe you aren't equipped to take that on, and no one expects you to be. even the person that is feeling suicidal doesn't expect you to have all the answers. They're simply trying to ask for help, and in an indirect way maybe. Some folks maybe feel comfortable with saying, you know what, I need help, I'm feeling suicidal. It's not usually that clear cut. It's things like, I wish I wasn't around anymore. I just want to go home and close my eyes and hide under my bed and never wake up again. That's still asking for help.
That's why you have to be comfortable introducing the word, though, so that you have to be comfortable saying suicide and introducing the word. I think an important part of this as well is listening. They need to be heard.
Absolutely.
And so don't run and don't panic when they say suicide. Sit and listen. What are they experiencing? What has brought them to this point? They need to talk about that. Let them talk about it with you. And then look together at connecting them with resources.
And I think the last thing that we really want to focus on, and I think something that the show did well, is following up. And Tony, I think, followed up with Clay throughout the whole series, constantly checking in with him. You know, I'll be with you the whole time while you listen to the tapes. I'm here for you, you know, that kind of language. I think also at the end of the series, when Clay was talking with the friend that he used to have, she has tattoos, worked at the coffee shop, Sky, and they just checked in with each other, and Clay said that he wasn't okay.
And I think the message that conveys, especially if you've had a conversation with somebody about suicide. So if you tell me you've been thinking about suicide, we go through all of this, and then I never talk to you again, what I've told you, the message I've given you is year two, something for
trauma,
me.
Catastrophize. I don't want anything to do with you. You scare me.
But if I follow up, I connect you to the right resources. I understand that I'm not carrying all of this, and I just follow up. So hey, how are things going? Yeah. I'm just checking in. It conveys to you that you still matter to me, and I understand that I can't fix what's going on for you, but I need you to know that I still care. That's all it conveys.
And that I'm thinking about you.
Yeah,
that you're in my thoughts.
Okay, so let's take a look at some warning signs. We've kind of categorized these into 3 different categories: verbal warning signs, behavioral, and mood signs. So these are things that you can look for in other people. Now be careful not to look too far. You're going to want to make sure that it's not just one of these things, and that you're acting on one of these. You're going to want to look for kind of a combination of these, but understand that it doesn't have to, there isn't a checklist.
So some verbal warning signs are talking about, so we have them here on our computer just to make sure we get them right. So people might talk about being a burden to others. They might talk about feeling trapped in their situation, in their body, in their life. They may express verbally some unbearable pain, or the opposite, feeling completely numb and having no feeling for anything anymore. They may talk about there's no really reason to live anymore, and they might actually just use the language of I want to kill myself. I'm gonna kill myself.
Final kind of language.
Yeah.
Like I'm done, or things will never get better, or final kind of language. I think behaviorally, what you're looking at, there may be a new use of substances. Suddenly they start drinking they weren't before, they start smoking weed and they weren't before, or hard drugs and they didn't before, or an increase in the substance use. You can also see things behavioral in saying goodbye, like in subtle ways. Not usually, I won't be seeing you anymore, but actually saying goodbye in subtle ways. Things like, you've always been a good friend to me and I appreciate that, and you did the best you could with me, or things like that. Now, if they're in a good mood and they're happy and there's no other signs at all, maybe they're just being a genuine, they genuinely want you to know that they value you. But if this is in conjunction with a bunch of other signs, then it could be a warning sign. Social withdrawal. If they're considering suicide as an answer, then you may see them start to pull away from your friend group, where they used to always come to movies or whatever it was you're doing, and they're not doing that anymore. It could be kind of a preparation stage. And so that's something to be aware of. And that's something to be careful of as well, because it can be harder to notice the warning signs if they're not around. Giving away prized possessions. And in 13 Reasons Why, we also saw Alex hiding it, finishing everything up. He tidied his room. His dad comes into the room and notices how clean it is. He's got everything organized in his closet. He's clearly preparing there.
Well, and he also lost interest, right? He lost interest in band or jazz band or whatever he was in. Yeah, he didn't really care to go anymore.
Right.
So moving on to some things to consider, some warning signs when someone's emotionally unwell or their emotional well-being or their mood. So depression, loss of interest like we talked about with Alex, feeling...
Especially if it's something that used to be really meaningful, right? Like he was quite into jazz band. If you have somebody whose whole life is basketball, and then all of a sudden they're not watching, they're not wearing their
favorite jersey.
You're right.
They're not going to practice. They could care less about keeping up with their skills or anything like that. That's something to kind of like,
And Alex's comment about it, when somebody asked him about it, he said, well, what does it really mean though? It doesn't mean anything. Like jazz band doesn't mean anything. Well, this used to be super important.
Yeah.
So if it suddenly doesn't mean anything, that's a warning sign.
Rage. So someone gets really upset or really activated by seemingly the littlest things.
This was not me raging. You did not see me raging.
But over something that
hardly raised my voice.
Most people wouldn't think is a big deal. That person is like consumed by it. They are activated. They are angry. They're upset.
Like the fight that Alex got in with
that jock in
whatever
the middle.
I think it starts with W. Whatever his name was.
In the middle of the street because he drove too close to him. I think that could have been resolved with maybe some name calling or eye rolling and like moved on. Right.
Always appropriate mechanisms for resolving conflict.
Not appropriate, but really, if
it didn't have to be a big deal.
It didn't have to be like just punching each other out in this like extreme aggressive behavior. It didn't need to be like that. Feeling humiliated and having anxiety about kind of
but again with the finality to it, right? Like
always
this is
finality
like I've been so embarrassed that I'll never get over it.
Right.
I'll always carry this with me. People will always think this of me, right? Like that kind of final thinking. So we really want to get across to you today the idea that suicide is not a solution. It's an irreversible choice for a temporary concern. I promise you it's a temporary concern. So please reach out. If you or someone that you know is having thoughts of suicide, please refer to the resources at the end of this video or contact a suicide prevention service in your area. But please don't just sit with it. Please do reach out because it can get better and you can get help.
And we really want to thank everyone for watching our very first episode. We know it was a serious topic, but we think it was a really important topic to discuss. And we really want to know from you guys if you agree with us or you disagree with us. And do you have a question that you would like us to discuss? And so let us know by commenting or tweeting us with the hashtag Youthicorn-questions. Don't forget to leave us a like or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we'll see you guys next time.
Survive.